Hi, I'm Paul Arthur. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau gets on the phone to chat with U.S. President Trump to see if there's potential solutions to the tariff war. Plus, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum makes a deal with Trump that results in a one-month reprieve from the 25% tariffs. Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu gets set to meet with Trump tomorrow for a key meeting on the Middle East ceasefire agreement.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks so much for joining us. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had two separate phone conversations with United States President Donald Trump earlier today to negotiate potential solutions to the tariff standoff. Details are sparse at this point. However, late this afternoon, there was some temporary relief for Canadians, as Trudeau posted on X that an agreement was reached with the U.S. to pause the tariffs until March 1st to give both parties the opportunity to negotiate. Here's what Trump had to say to reporters earlier today before the second phone call took place.
On Canada, when you talk to Justin Trudeau again, is there anything he can give you at 3 p.m. when you talk again to also secure a pause, like you said, with Mexico?
I don't know. We have big deficits with Canada, like we do with all countries. I mean, I look at some of the deals made, I say, who the hell made these deals are so bad? But with Canada, I have a talk with him, and you maybe know or maybe not. We're going to meet again or talk again at 3 o'clock, right after my next meeting, and we'll see what happens. I can't tell you what's going to happen.
You mentioned that he could agree to change your mind on the tariff?
Well, we can always, but look, what I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protection, military protection. We don't need them to build our cars. I'd rather see Detroit or South Carolina or any one of our Tennessee, any one of our states build the cars. They could do it very easily. We don't need them for the cars. We don't need them for lumber. We don't need them for anything.
Trudeau has said Canada will retaliate with tariffs of its own against $155 billion worth of American goods, including alcohol, furniture, and natural resources. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says her country is being granted a one-month reprieve from 25% U.S. tariffs to give time for further negotiations as well. Sheinbaum says she had a good conversation with President Donald Trump this morning with great respect for Mexico's sovereignty. She says Mexico has agreed to station 10,000 members of its National Guard on the U.S. border to combat drug trafficking with a focus on fentanyl. And in exchange, Sheinbaum says the U.S. committed to working on preventing the movement of high-powered weapons into Mexico.
I had a great talk with Mexico, but we have to stop fentanyl from coming in, whether I like somebody or not, and we have to stop the illegal aliens from coming in. I think we've lost 200,000 people on average a year for many years, much higher than the 100,000, could be even closer to 300,000. And they've agreed to put in 10,000 soldiers permanently, like forever, 10,000 soldiers at their side of the border and stop fentanyl and illegal aliens from coming into our country. They have a big incentive to do. Other than that, we've agreed to talk and consider various other things. We haven't agreed on tariffs yet, and maybe we will, maybe we won't.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre held a news conference in Vancouver today in which he outlined his Canada First border plan.
I will take back control of Canada's borders. My common sense Canada First plan should immediately be adopted by Parliament. We must recall Parliament now and put Liberal Party power struggles aside so that we can adopt this plan to save our people and secure our borders. The plan: immediately deploy military troops, helicopters, and surveillance to the border to spot and intercept risks. As the recent remarks by the Canadian Forces Chief of the Defence Staff, General Jenny Kerrigan, offered earlier this month, we can deploy military assets into the sky, whether helicopters or other surveillance tools, and we should do so. In fact, we should have done so long ago. 2, expand the powers of CBSA border agents to patrol everywhere along the border, not just at official border crossings. 3, hire 2,000, at least 2,000 new CBSA agents to intercept illegal crossers, drugs, guns, and other dangerous law breaking. 4, install high-powered scanners at all major land crossings and shipping ports. These scanners can see through the walls of containers and vehicles to spot drugs, guns, and stolen cars. 5, build border surveillance towers that we can deploy on and use to scan the landscape and detect incursions. Also, deploy truck-mounted drone systems that can spot incursions from the sky. 6, track departures. We should keep track of who's leaving so that we know which deportees are still in our country.
Poilievre also promised to tear down interprovincial trade barriers across Canada if he's elected Prime Minister. Ontario Premier Doug Ford held a news conference today to outline some of that province's retaliatory measures to U.S. tariffs.
Premier Doug Ford has announced Ontario will rip up a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's SpaceX to deliver high-speed internet to remote areas as part of the province's response to U.S. tariffs.
I'm not going to support someone that is hell-bent on destroying our province, destroying people's families, taking jobs away from them. We're done with that. We never started this fight whatsoever, but we're going to win this fight.
The deal was set to bring SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet system to 15,000 premises in rural and northern Ontario. Ford also announced that Ontario will ban all American companies from provincial contracts until U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods are removed.
Every year, the Ontario government and its agencies spend $30 billion in procurement alongside our $200 billion plan to build Ontario. And I'm urging all 444 municipalities to do the same. U.S.-based businesses will now lose out on tens of billions of dollars in new revenues. They only have President Trump to blame.
However, Ford said he would not be canceling a deal with Staples to move 9 Service Ontario locations into their stores, saying the company has a Canadian headquarters in Ontario.
Well, they're employing thousands of people. They're buying thousands of products. You can't compare apples and oranges.
Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie has been calling for weeks for Ford to cancel the Starlink deal, and she said she is glad it is finally happening.
First of all, I would never have signed that Starlink agreement at a cost of $100 million when that technology existed here in Ontario today.
NDP leader Marit Stiles agreed and said paying an astronomical price per customer always seemed odd.
I could never understand why he was willing to pay so much more than a regular connection, like to Starlink. That deal always smelled funny to me, honestly. So I think we can get a better deal with a Canadian company to supply and connect so many people in this province, and we can do it fast.
Elon Musk posted a response to Ford's announcement on X, simply stating, oh well. BC Premier David Eby says the 25% tariff to be placed on BC lumber exports by the U.S. will make it harder for the wildfire-stricken areas of Southern California to rebuild. Eby says up to 1/4 of lumber used for construction in America currently comes from Canada, and home building in the LA area where thousands of structures were destroyed will be more expensive if the tariffs are put in place. Meanwhile, Manitoba is looking at more retaliatory measures against the U.S. over threatened tariffs. Premier Wab Kinew says he's looking for ways to prevent companies in the United States from bidding on provincial contracts. Quebec Premier François Legault has also talked about restricting American access to public contracts. And Donald Trump's meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu tomorrow will be his first with a foreign leader since returning to the White House. It comes as U.S. and Arab mediators begin the daunting work of brokering the next phase of a ceasefire agreement to wind down the 15-month war in Gaza. The AP's Joe Fetterman explains.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Washington on a very important visit to the White House. Netanyahu is scheduled on Tuesday to meet with President Donald Trump. This is the first visit by a foreign leader to the White House since Trump took office last month. And the stakes are high. The two men are expected to discuss not only Israel's war in the Gaza Strip, but also issues that could impact the wider Middle East. Israel and Hamas are in the midst of a 6-week ceasefire. During that time, Hamas is releasing several dozen hostages in return for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. But it's not quite clear what happens at the end of these 6 weeks. In fact, talks are expected to begin this week on the next phase of this ceasefire. Netanyahu has been signaling to his hardline allies at home that he wants to resume the war against Hamas at the end of these 6 weeks. Trump, on the other hand, has signaled that he would like to see this war wind down. Their talks on Tuesday are expected to focus heavily on this issue, but also their shared broader goal of a peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have indicated that they are interested in a deal, but they also expect Israel to make some serious concessions to the Palestinians as part of any agreement. That could leave Netanyahu torn between pressure at home from his hardline allies who want to resume that war and pressure from the White House that is interested in moving on and focusing on this broader regional accommodation.
A shortage of infantry troops and supply routes under Russian drone attacks have dealt a blow to Ukrainian forces around the strategic eastern city of Pokrovsk. The crucial supply hub lies at the confluence of highways leading to key cities in the Donetsk region. Ukrainian commanders say they do not have enough reserves to sustain defense lines, and new recruits are unprepared and sometimes abandon positions. Heavy fog in recent days prevented Ukrainians from effectively using surveillance drones, allowing Russian troops to control dominant heights and take more territory. A new study from the Public Health Agency of Canada has found alcohol-related deaths rose about 18% during the coronavirus pandemic. Researchers found 1,600 more deaths than expected, a total of 10,800. They compared alcohol-related deaths and hospitalizations before and after the pandemic. They also found hospitalizations jumped 8% during the pandemic, with an even higher increase of about 14% in 2020 and 2021. In local news, the city of Lethbridge witnessed a substantial decrease in overdose deaths from last year. Data from the province's substance use surveillance system shows that 2024 up until the month of October saw 40 people dying from overdose, down 79 deaths from 2023, and the lowest since 2019 that saw only 20. Across Alberta, fentanyl accounts for 95% of acute accidental drug poisoning deaths, with methamphetamine being involved with 64% of deaths. The highest demographic for overdose deaths are men between the ages of 35 and 39 years old. Lethbridge police say they have arrested and charged a 41-year-old man in connection with a robbery at a liquor store along Micmac Boulevard. On January 27th, Carlos Neal Ironshirt entered the store after 8:30 p.m. and proceeded to select some alcohol and leave without paying. The worker at the door time-locked it, but eventually let the man go after he was threatened. Ironshirt is currently charged with robbery and is waiting for a judicial interim release hearing. Marijuana continues to become more socially acceptable, but according to experts, there are negative consequences for those who use it. Although many use marijuana to reduce stress or anxiety, addiction experts warn that it is nothing more than a gateway drug that will surely lead to the use of harder drugs. Bruce Holstead, a Canadian certified addiction counselor, warns of the consequences that marijuana use can bring.
I'm not here to negate the fact that marijuana couldn't be used as medicine. But when we open the door to it being used as a recreational drug on the same platform as alcohol, we have a problem. The problem with addiction is you're using drugs to mask other symptoms of life's problems. When you reach the point where marijuana is no longer addressing those feelings, those emotions, those symptoms, individuals will often reach out for other drugs. It's the pathway of addiction itself. Nobody ever woke up deciding that they wanted to be an addict. It started off with a little bit of recreational use on a weekend, went over to a little bit throughout the week. Maybe now we're using it for stress, and now we're using it first thing in the morning because of the day ahead of us, and that just perpetuates. And when that you reach that capacity, you begin to start to mix and engage in other drugs. Be exceptionally careful. I've worked with thousands of individuals. I've worked with individuals who are 30 years old and had a great career and no questions and began the process of addiction and find themselves 5 years later in a complete broken down, I don't know what happened to my life. It's been known forever that marijuana is a gateway drug to addiction.
In 2019, edible cannabis products, cannabis extracts, and topical cannabis became available for legal purchase in Canada. These products were added to those already available for sale, such as dried cannabis and cannabis oil. The City of Lethbridge say they have agreed with the Lethbridge and District Exhibition to collaborate on bringing Canada Day events to the exhibition grounds. The city says last year over 12,000 people attended the Canada Day celebrations at Henderson Lake Park nearby, where they faced logistical challenges such as overcrowding, park damage, and security. The city says moving some of the events to the exhibition will bring substantial economic benefits and reduce operational costs, and will ultimately preserve the beauty of Henderson Lake Park.
Some of the larger functions are going to shift to the grounds of Lethbridge and District Exhibition. Those include the food truck vendor alley that's always a big hit, as well as the main stage and entertainment.
We also want to let everyone in the city know that we are open for collaboration, partnerships. Anybody who wants to be involved in Canada Day, do please reach out, as this is a celebration that is really about our community, and we want to make sure that everybody feels a part of it.
Vendor applications for this year's Canada Day celebrations are now open for food trucks, entertainers, the youth market, and the Kids and Family Fun Zone. February is National Psychology Month, which, according to the Canadian Psychological Association, has its roots in science that seeks to understand our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Rana Kamel, registered psychologist, explains how research has made advances, breaking some of the myths around seeking help for mental health challenges.
A big shift is not focusing on the problem, but you're focusing on the person and everything that kind of encompasses that person, that bio-psycho-social perspective and focus. Just psychoeducation, like just really trying to talk about mental health and educate people and dispel some of those myths about mental health and hopefully alleviate some of the stigma associated to it. And then, of course, everything online that people can just access apps and, you know, different relaxation techniques and mindfulness things, you know, things that sometimes I might not practice myself, but I'll say to people, you know, you can find a lot of actually good things online. And then there's also online counseling. You don't have to see somebody in person. If somebody's really nervous about walking into a building or going to an office, there are a lot of online options where you're just like this. You're in a Zoom meeting just with the counselor and you're, you know, speaking one-on-one. So there's lots of avenues, different avenues you can take if you're really nervous about that in person. So those kinds of therapies really help when you're really making that connection of symptoms and things that happen physically to what's happening to you, you know, mental health wise and those experiences.
The 2025 theme of Psychology Month is Women in Science, highlighting the work of 34 remarkable scientists. Hope you're bundling up when heading outside this week. It is a chilly one, but there will be a bit of a reprieve later in the week. The full weather details are coming up next. Well, the weather outside is frightful. Tonight, expect periods of snow with a low of -27, but with the wind chill, it'll feel like -36 with a risk of frostbite. Tuesday, expect more flurries with a high of -24 and a wind chill near -36. The sun will return on Wednesday. Expect -20. Warming up to a much more tolerable -9 on Thursday with sunny conditions. Friday, we'll see periods of snow and a high of -12 degrees. The weekend is shaping up quite nicely with partly cloudy skies and a high of -5 for Saturday. Sunday, the mercury will drop to -14 with a 60% chance of flurries. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 0 degrees with an average low of -12. The record high was 17 degrees set back in 1935, and the record low was a very cold -35 back in 1947. The sun rose at 8:01 and will set at 5:30. Let's see how Tuesday is shaping up across Canada now. Snow is on tap for the west coast. It should be 2 degrees in Victoria and a high of 0 in Vancouver. Periods of light snow ending late in the morning, then a mix of sun and cloud and a high of -25 for Calgary. Edmonton is currently under an extreme cold warning, but that should mitigate itself by tomorrow. Expect light flurries and then a high of -24. Heading eastward into the prairies, Regina is also under an extreme cold warning. Dangerous wind chill values of -40 or colder will occur at times over the next few days. Same situation in Saskatoon with that cold weather warning. Expect flurries and a high of -24. A mix of sun and cloud in the morning with a high of -18 for Winnipeg. But with wind chill, it will feel like -36. Over in the central part of our nation, expect an overcast day with 30% chance of flurries late in the morning and in the afternoon, and a high of -2 in Toronto. Same story in Ottawa with a high of -8, mainly cloudy, and -8 on tap for Montreal on Tuesday. In Atlantic Canada, expect a 30% chance of flurries with a high of -2 in Fredericton, snow mixed with rain for both Halifax and St. John's. In Charlottetown, periods of snow and a high of -4 for Tuesday. Well, the chief market strategist at Corpay says a weaker loonie could push prices higher for everything from groceries to Amazon products as well as vacations. Carl Shamata made the remarks after the Canadian dollar traded at its lowest level in decades on the eve of sweeping U.S. tariffs. The loonie plunged to less than 69 cents U.S. as of this afternoon, and Shamata says it could see a further decline of 2 to 3% if an agreement isn't reached in the coming weeks. But he says there is a silver lining, as a weaker dollar could help offset the cost of tariffs for buyers around the world purchasing Canada-made goods. And Canadian alcohol producers are hailing decisions from several provinces for yanking U.S. booze from provincial liquor stores. They say the move will deliver a boost to homegrown business while adding ammunition to a federal plan aimed at getting the U.S. to back down from tariffs. Yesterday, Ontario Premier Doug Ford revealed that his province would pull hundreds of American wine, beer, spirits, and seltzers sold in the LCBO, which he notes make up about $1 billion in sales in a year. British Columbia, Quebec, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador followed Ford's steps, urging people to buy Canadian products instead. Tim Hortons is bringing back the iconic cups for its roll-up to win contest. The coffee chain will reintroduce hot beverage cups with rims that can be rolled up to reveal a prize when the promotion begins on February 24th. The promotion was first launched in 1986 but was known as Roll Up the Rim to Win until 2020, when the company moved the contest to a completely online format due to the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. The company wanted to ensure staff didn't have to handle rims that had been sipped by customers, but it is bringing back cups with rollable rims, saying winners will now show staff their winning rims before dropping them in a box. It will also keep the digital game it's been using for the last 5 years. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 291 basis points to 25,241. The Dow was also down 122 points to 44,421. The S&P 500 was down 45 points to 5,994, and the Nasdaq was also down 235 points to 19,391. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 30 cents to 72.23 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 30 cents to 3.35 US. Gold was up 21.40 to 28.33.90 US an ounce, and silver was up 26 cents to 32.39 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley is at $6.64, canola is at $14.51, and corn is at $8.56 per bushel. Live cattle February contract was down $1.62 to $202.97. Feeder cattle March contract was down $5.22 to $270.50, and lean hogs February contract was up 15 cents to $84.32. And the Canadian dollar was up over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 69.30 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, after a couple of phone calls between Prime Minister Trudeau and U.S. President Donald Trump, an agreement has been reached to pause the 25% tariffs for 30 days to provide some additional time for negotiations. Coming up after the break, our U.S. correspondent Lisa Daftari joins us to discuss the tariff wars and the Middle East situation in more detail. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. The tariffs on Canada and Mexico start tomorrow, with Canada's retaliating with tariffs of our own against the U.S. Joining us now to discuss this and more is Lisa Daftari, our U.S. correspondent from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles. Good to have you with us, Lisa. The White House says Canada has misunderstood the tariff order as a trade war, while Mexico is serious. Did you want to unpack that a bit for us?
It's interesting, right? So Donald Trump is using a tactic, and it's a tactic of deterrence, and it's a tactic to bring our friends, our enemies, our trade partners, our potential trade partners to a place where American boundaries are physical and non-physical are respected. So that would mean, our northern boundary, our southern boundaries, trade, many of our companies going overseas and doing business in other places, wanting to bring them back home. So that's tariffs. Tariffs are economic just pressure on these different entities, but the different nations, different actors are responding differently. So far, we've had 2 weeks of a Trump presidency. And what have we seen? We have seen, Panama back down from trading or having the special deal with China. We've seen Colombia back down. We have seen, obviously a deal between Hamas and Israel for now. We shall see how that goes, and we can talk about that a bit later. But now Canada and Mexico, our northern and southern neighbors. And in the last few hours, we saw Mexico respond to the tariffs and say, please give us a pause on the tariffs in exchange for, we'll put 10,000 soldiers at the border. Well, why couldn't they do this before? We have so many migrants flooding into our nation right now, so many dangerous migrants, a lot of them obviously being well-intentioned. The fact is we can't absorb the number, even the well-intentioned ones. And for that reason, we do have a crisis here on our hands. So Donald Trump's theory is that, well, if I put the pressure on Canada and Mexico, they should understand it as let's work together, and it's not a tariff war as Canada is perhaps taking it. So that's
okay. So we need to read between the lines and see what Trump is really after, perhaps. Now, he doesn't seem worried about the Canadian counter tariffs, to be honest. At least, you look at him, he goes, yeah, whatever. I mean, now I would guess that the price of gasoline probably will be going up, though, fairly soon, in the U.S. So, and again, we were seeing a pause for Mexico. So how long do you think these tariffs will last? Is it possible that, Trump's talking about illegal immigrants and drugs going across the border, right? That's why he's doing this, right? Now, the stats say 99% of those issues are from Mexico, only 1% from Canada. So maybe, is it possible that Trump's tone could change if Canada were to get in gear and put much more heavy-duty, I guess, border patrols in place? We've done some, and of course we have an upcoming election. So, if we end up with a conservative government, will things change?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And I think more than anything, with regards to Canada, and I don't want to speak for the president, but from what my perspective is that it's more of a positioning. If you are in line with us, if you want to cooperate with us, therefore these tariffs won't be an issue. Donald Trump's in a very, very tough position, challenging position with regards to the U.S. economy as well. Many people would say Donald Trump got elected because of the economy, right? Mm-hmm. People want to see low gas prices. People want to see low prices at the supermarket. People want to have, just a better economy overall. Can't afford just living. Here in Los Angeles is a prime example of that. So in the interim, the government, the Donald Trump administration has warned that prices may go up here in the United States. Obviously, the markets are responding this morning with the uncertainty that we're seeing. We're seeing, obviously, the prices haven't gone down. It's only been 2 weeks, but really the way that he delivered that message that, the economy will improve and X, Y, and Z, But this is all perhaps the curve that we have to tolerate in order to get the country back on track. And that is the message that is coming from the White House right now.
Right. And President Trump also indicating that he's going to be soon slapping the European Union with tariffs. So how far is he going to go with this, right? Does Trump think he can, take on the whole world, I guess, and come out as the winner? I mean, logic says, over time that's probably not going to happen. But again, maybe he's just, using this, when it works, and then he'll adjust as needed, as things unfold.
Yeah, and I think that that's a pretty good assessment of how this will go down. Look, Trump is trying to get the country back on track, and it has gone very far off track. And everywhere you look, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine war, the wars in the Middle East, the terror proxies going wild and even shooting at our own assets, American assets in the Middle East, the Houthis in Yemen, for example, or insurgencies in Iraq and Syria, which continue, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the list goes on. We haven't been able to control the centrifuges from spinning in Iran. And, again, the list goes on and on. So he's tackling these issues one by one. Europe not working together with the United States. Really, everything is off track. And the way that he sees that this will move forward is to bring back what the United States is known for, and that's capitalism. We incentivize, we will provide opportunity for those who will play along and pay their fair share. I remember watching television in New York when I was living on the East Coast and watching local news, and Donald Trump, who was just the local millionaire, would come on TV and would say, this one and that one, they're not paying their fair share. We shouldn't be paying for the UN. We shouldn't be paying for NATO. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do that. And that was long before he announced his run for presidency. This is what he has always believed. This is what he thinks is a major problem with our economy, with our foreign policy, with the way that we deal with our friends and foes. So he is trying to get that all back on track. And really, it's only been 2 weeks. The amount of reaction and the amount that they've been able to move the needle in just 2 weeks, when most of his appointees haven't even been sworn in yet, is truly amazing. So I do think deterrence will work in many cases, and when it doesn't, then he can tweak as needed.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling how fast things are changing. I mean, again, pulling out of the World Health Organization, that got some attention, you know what? And well, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's probably a good move. We'll see, if other nations, follow that as well. Now, on the Panama Canal issue you mentioned earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio meeting with Panama's President Mulino. Now, he's saying he's willing to review some of the agreements they have with Chinese companies. These are signed agreements. I think some of them are like 25 years long. So I don't know, what that means to review. Is he going to somehow back out of them? I mean, they're signed. What can he do?
Right. And I think, again, it's the positioning, right? So Marco Rubio, first hours on the job, hops on a plane, touches down in Panama, and you see the optics. You see him going there and asking for a meeting. And, the tagline that we're seeing everywhere, promises made, promises kept, where at least that conversation with the Panamanian leader leads to, well, we will do whatever is best and really realign themselves with the United States. That's the goal of all of this. And it can't happen overnight, to your point, right? A lot of these deals are multi-year or they're already in progress. It's a positioning. It's a positioning that we need to realign, and we have to get, especially our neighbors, especially the ones that are economically vital, like Panama, back on track to work together with the United States.
Yeah, well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens there. I mean, it's nice to hear, too, from Trump, hey, I don't think we're going to need to use troops. And that was, I figured that all along. But, I guess it's one of those tools you have in your belt, right? Now, more Israeli hostages being returned. Actually, speaking of hostages, of course, the hostages coming back from Venezuela as well. That was, a nice surprise, right? But again, the ceasefire continuing, more hostages returned. Israeli PM Netanyahu not terribly happy about that exchange, how it was handled, and he is going to be meeting with President Trump this week. Any insight on that?
So very important that he's meeting with Donald Trump this week. I think this shows a true pivot from what we saw with the Biden White House, where they were trying to really straddle these two lines to say, well, we need a Palestinian state. In the moments where there are still attacks, terrorist attacks coming from Gaza, coming from the West Bank, coming from Hezbollah, and to talk about Palestinian state was kind of tone deaf. It created, this distance between Israel and the White House, and it also tied Israel's hands in with respect to retaliation and what it needed to do to eradicate Hamas. So that meeting, I think, will be, again, a very important optic. It'll be obviously very constructive. The two have a relationship. They work together on the Abraham Accords. They work together to move the embassy in Trump's first administration. So that's very, very important. With regards to the deal that was struck, again, that was days before Trump was sworn in as president. Very interesting, because his envoy, Steve Witkoff, did go down to Doha. He was part of the negotiations. That deterrence and that positioning from the United States was very integral in striking that deal. But now, obviously, can we trust Hamas? The way that the hostages have been returned, walking through the mobs of thousands of supporters of Hamas, it makes it very difficult for people like myself who do talk about the innocent Palestinian people who deserve better than Hamas leading them. It makes that case very difficult when you're seeing so many of the Palestinian people support Hamas, but to take these innocent civilian hostages, so a young woman who had nothing to do with this war, was not a soldier, was just trying to get back home, or an American hostage, walking through these mobs, fearing their lives, and being humiliated on stage before being given back to Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu obviously being very, very upset about this, and a lot of bait and switch, a lot of double talk coming from Hamas. Again, they're a terror organization. They have been treated like a sovereign state because of the position that we're in, but they should not be. And then we should always remember that they are a terror organization, not to be trusted.
Yeah, absolutely. We lose sight of that so quickly, it seems. Now, Arab countries rejecting Trump's proposal to move Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt and Jordan. Interesting. So why the pushback on that? Well, don't want them here. I mean, I get it. In one sense, they want to say, okay, this land belongs to them, and so they should stay there. But wouldn't it be helpful to take a lot of the refugee load off of that situation, at least to some degree, partially? But it's like an absolute refusal. Why?
Right. So we've seen this before, where they wash their hands of any responsibility of the Palestinians and refuse to take them in. They want Israel and the global community to deal with this crisis. They want that to be on them and not to be an economic or security burden on Egypt or Jordan. Look, at the end of the day, when you do look at these more moderate Arab states, they don't want a terrorism problem. They may keep their mouths shut. It's not they're not Zionists. It's not that they support Israel, but they want Israel to deal with the terrorism problem. They just don't want to inherit it. And with regards to the women and children, why don't you take them in? If you're calling them refugees, take 15 years, they're saying, to build Gaza again. Why not take them in? Why not? So Donald Trump is very confident that he will get them to take them in. He did say it's going to happen despite the pushback from the Arab states. Saudi Arabia doubling down and saying Saudis support Egypt and Jordan's refusal not to take them in. So we shall see what kind of deal can be struck to get them to take them in and to really come up with outside-of-the-box solutions to this problem. Look, the Middle East has suffered long enough from the same dead end between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's not going to work. They have never had proper leadership. You can't have terrorists making demands from the global community to fix this issue. So we have to think of outside-the-box ideas. And I think the Abraham Accords were a great outside-the-box solution to moving forward. Now we have to deal with this issue because the Abraham Accords sidestepped the Palestinian issue. Now we have to deal with it. So we shall see what they come up with and whether Donald Trump will be successful in this solution that he's come up with now.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see what happens out of these talks with the Israeli Prime Minister. By the way, Elon Musk, just briefly, the chair of DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, claims that they just saved $1 billion by canceling 104 DEI contracts. So, man, there's just so much stuff happening. And of course, you're hearing a lot of stuff from the left complaining about that, but I'm guessing that's going to be continuing. He's also alleging that payment approval officers at the Treasury were instructed always to approve payments, even to known fraudulent or terrorist groups. That's really, really interesting to hear that. If that's happening, I would think there'd be a lot of upset Americans, as they should be, and, will he be able to clean that up?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this office that Donald Trump created with Elon Musk at the helm, long time coming. I mean, it's so necessary to clean up all of this excess and all of these made up fraudulent funds and wasting taxpayer money. I mean, this is such a bipartisan issue or nonpartisan issue, depending on how you want to phrase it. All Americans should want the government to save money when it's going to just frivolous causes that could be spent on other things right now, like fixing the economy, like getting the migrants settled. There's so much homelessness that's rampant everywhere, crime, the fentanyl crisis. There's really so much. And when you look at so many of these funds, I mean, some of them are just so ridiculous. I was taking a look the other day, and it's really just absurd. So we're very, very grateful that this is something that will be ongoing. I know the left will complain about everything that Trump does. They will phrase it in a special way. They have the legacy media writing headlines that, frame it in a certain way. But these are all things that will help Americans in the long run. Absolutely.
Yeah, no one likes to see money wasted, especially if it's coming from your own pocket, right? So, hey, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Lisa Daftari, our U.S. correspondent from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles.
A group of researchers from all over the world are closely examining the long-term effects that spaceflight has on the human mind and body. There are 2 Canadian experts involved in the research project, and they are both from our own University of Lethbridge. Joining us today to tell us more about this is Dr. Gerlinda Metz. She is a professor with the University of Lethbridge's Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience. Dr. Metz, it's great to have you with us. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much, Naveen. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great to have you back on our show again. And it must be exciting to be working with a team of experts from all around the world. Can you just share a little bit more about what this research will be trying to accomplish?
So we're very excited that we're part of this very significant project because it is NASA's largest ever research effort with human subjects, with astronauts. And so they're actually attempting to integrate an immense amount of data all together into one cohesive database to make better sense of health for astronauts. And this project is directed by Dr. Afshin Beheshti, who is a professor and director of the Space Biomedicine Institute at the University of Pittsburgh. And he has a long record of working with NASA. And on the team are also Tony Montina, who's the NMR and MRI facility director here at the University of Lethbridge. So we're very excited to be a part of this large research effort.
So you're talking about the University of Pittsburgh, you're talking about NASA. How did all this come together, and why the University of Lethbridge?
Actually, we already had established collaboration with NASA for a number of years. We have helped them to investigate molecules in the body, in blood and urine that we obtained from space, from the astronauts who lived on the International Space Station for a prolonged mission. And so these projects have been going very well. And we were invited to continue this collaboration and actually expand with additional numbers of samples. And so here now we have access to this very significant amount of data so that we can integrate our data with their database that involves multiple levels of biological regulations that are linked to spaceflight. And this is a really exciting project and very important also as a learning experience, not only for space flight, because we are going into becoming a more of a spacefaring civilization these days, but really we're also learning important lessons for life on Earth as well.
So what is your role in particular going to be focusing on?
So our project will focus on molecular chemistry. We will actually investigate small molecules called metabolites in urine and blood of astronauts. So they're giving us samples from before they went to space, during the space station stay in the mission, and then after they returned back to Earth. And so we have a long time course of regular samples being collected, which is very exciting. And so we can actually look at individual astronaut samples and how they changed over time, but we can also compare across different individuals. And what is also really phenomenal in this project is that for the first time we'll have a larger group of female astronauts, because small astronauts are males. And we didn't actually have many studies that investigated sex differences, so how females compare to males. And females have very different health conditions and stress responses than males. And it is very important to learn more about how do we better while we're on a long duration space mission, and what do we expect in terms of health outcomes? What can we predict for male versus female astronauts?
So you're talking about blood and urine samples before they go to space and then after they return home. What kind of differences have you noticed with these blood and urine samples before and after?
It's very interesting that actually males adapt a little bit faster to the stress and the mission when they're going to the International Space Station than females would. And we need to take this into account in what kind of markers we're looking for. And it's very important to look at these small metabolites, these small molecules in very accessible samples like urine that you can easily provide, so we can follow up with health measurements. And this is important when we go to space, because space is a very, very harsh environment. These astronauts are going through extreme levels of stress, not only psychologically, but also physiologically and physically. We have also microgravity or zero gravity. We have lower levels of a magnetic field than we have on Earth. We have very cold temperatures. We have very dry air. We also have various levels of radiation. This is a very harsh environment that astronauts enter into, and there are all kinds of health complications that they might be at risk. And so we want to better understand, with looking at these molecules, what risks are they to be expected, but also how can we produce countermeasures and treatments for them to prevent these adverse health outcomes for them.
And you mentioned one of your colleagues, Tony Montina, who is also working on the project. Can you explain a bit about what his focus will be on?
So my colleague, Tony Montina, he's the director of the NMR facility. We're using what we call nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. That is a mouthful, but what we're doing is we study small molecules. And when you look, for example, at a urine sample, you actually have 200 different types of these small molecules you can measure. So it's like a very personal fingerprint of what is going on inside of the body. Every cell is producing these small metabolites, and they are then measurable in liquids or in any tissue of the body. But here, when we work with urine, we have to make sure we're looking at these metabolites as a kind of a reflection of what is going on inside the body and inside our cells.
It's just so fascinating how space flight can affect your body and can affect the mind. And apparently space flight also affects mitochondria, which generate energy for the human cell. What do we know about how and why mitochondria is changed by space flight, and what are some potential solutions?
So mitochondria are like the powerhouses of the cell. Every cell has mitochondria. And what happens when we're going through extreme stress or we're especially entering a space environment, these mitochondria might go into, some at least, into a dysfunctional state. This is such an extreme impact on the body to go to space with all the different stresses going on, that mitochondria might be disrupted in their normal function. So they actually produce less energy than what we would like to see and what the body would need. Because every cell has mitochondria and because organs are made out of cells, cells can actually lead to diseases in various organs through mitochondrial disruption. So this is something that is a very important learning experience, because what we're seeing also in aging on Earth often is that mitochondria become dysfunctional. So we actually learn a great deal about aging on Earth. So what can we do about it? That's an important question. And we have actually developed on Earth, through many clinical studies, various drug treatments that can improve mitochondrial function. Now that we know that's actually based on Dr. Afshin Beheshti's work, that mitochondria are dysfunctional in space. We can use and test some of these therapies that we have available, and maybe even dietary countermeasures could be effective. So for example, think of antioxidants that reduce the amount of cellular stress that would protect mitochondria in their function. There are many other ways of how drugs could affect and boost mitochondrial function. And so these need to be tested now that we have realized that there is an issue. We can now hopefully help astronauts stay healthier for longer in space.
And I'm told that astronauts have a higher risk of cancer. And you had mentioned earlier that there's a lot of radiation up in space, so that might be behind it. But what else would be behind it other than radiation? And will your research be exploring this area as well?
So cancer, indeed, like you say, is a very important risk factor that we need to take into account for space flight. And we have low levels of radiation. We also have ionizing, very strong resources of radiation, such as solar flares produced when the sun is very active and it's going through cycles where it's more or less active. And when it's highly active, this is more putting a higher risk on the body. Also, we have cosmic radiation that is always there, and we have ionizing radiation when particles meet the Earth's magnetic field. So we have various sources of radiation that can potentially cause cancer. So that is a significant risk factor. We are also worried about that, for example, for pilots who actually go into higher levels of in our atmosphere, and they also experience potentially higher levels of radiation by flying. So we need to learn about these health risks. What this radiation can actually do is induce DNA damage. So that's the genetic code in our cells, and that can actually trigger some cancerous risk factors that lead to tumor growth in the body. And we have to learn about these risks and also how to prevent them, potentially through drugs or dietary countermeasures.
And what about eye disorders from spaceflight? What is it that affects the eyes negatively?
Yeah, there are actually various risk factors again when we go to outer space. First of all, the weightlessness we're going through lower levels of gravity is shifting the fluid in the body. And actually, we have more liquids, more fluids going into our heads and our upper body. So this actually can affect the eyes, and often we're seeing also that faces become more puffy over time when they're in space. We might adapt to that, with longer periods in space to some degree, but still we still talk about this kind of puffy face or moon face in astronauts because the fluids in the body are moving up. So this can also change the pressure inside of the brain. It can also change the pressure inside of our eye bulbs. And it will push the eye bulbs to be flatter than we usually have, which leads to the picture not displaying correctly on the retina. In addition, we also have issues with radiation that can harm the retina, which includes nerve cells and the optic nerve as well. So we might have some degenerative changes there over time. And that's something to be concerned about as well.
And then there's some other health risks. I'll just list off a few here. Cardiovascular disease, renal issues such as kidney stones, disruption of circadian rhythms are also risks. And I've even heard that some astronauts experience bone loss.
Yeah, that's actually a factor that many think of first when they think about space flights, because with the zero gravity or low levels of putting our weight on the body, we are losing bone mass over time. And that's something we also experience on Earth with aging, that often we do have more breakable bones, more sensitive bones. And so astronauts experience that at a much higher, faster rate than we have on Earth. So astronauts might experience 1% of bone loss in actually a few days, whereas on Earth we experience 3% of bone loss within a decade. So it goes really, really fast for astronauts. And that's because they don't put enough weight on their legs, for example. So the legs become very sensitive to damage. And there are several countermeasures. For example, astronauts are recommended to exercise for at least 2 hours a day. Exercise helps, and muscle activity is important because also we lose muscle mass when we're in outer space, for the same reasons that we're not putting enough weight on our limbs and we don't stay upright. Also, there's a really cool invention with using rubber bands between the knees and the feet, so that there's pressure on the bones through the rubber bands that you can put on a trouser or on the spacesuit. And so this will help put the pressure back on the bones where we actually lost it. We still have to learn about new ways how to prevent the bone loss, because this leads to calcium leakage into our body at higher doses than what we usually see. And that can actually cause some of the kidney problems you mentioned, because we can get kidney stones from high levels of calcium floating around in our body, and it might accumulate in the kidneys, which is something that can be very painful.
Dr. Gerlinda Metz is a professor with the University of Lethbridge's Canadian Centre for Behavioral Neuroscience and is part of a global research team studying the long-term effects of spaceflight. Dr. Metz, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Likewise, I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.